If we go to the Dolphins, they're one of the most polarizing teams in the NFL last season. They dominated the weaker teams on their schedule, going 10-1 against teams that had a losing record while averaging over 35 points per game. However, including their loss to the Chiefs in the wild card playoffs, Miami went 1-6 against teams that had a winning record, averaging roughly 16 points per game in those. Tyreek Hill has big expectations for the Dolphins offense this season. Listen to this.
Very excited, man. Like, as a lot of people know, like, we got a fast-paced offense. You know, we was number 1 last year. I believe it was number 6 the year before. So really looking forward to, taking another step. And that next step is winning the playoff game, man, because we got the talent to do it. We got one of the best quarterbacks in the league, so very excited about that. The real goal is to win the Super Bowl. Man.
Yes.
It's cool to, get paid and all that, but, being able to win the Super Bowl and bring something special to the city of Miami, something that can live with us forever. I believe that's like very monumental for all of us.
Cheetah not shying away from the high expectations. And, Jeff, they're clearly high in South Florida right now with what they're expecting out of this team. We saw those numbers, though, showing the struggles against good teams last season. I think that's the most important thing to focus on here. How is Mike McDaniel trying to combat that this offseason?
Well, it's really interesting, Laura, because Mike McDaniel is leaning into these narratives. He made very clear to his players already that, look, these narratives are going to follow us all the way through the season and really into December and January until we prove these narratives false. One thing I thought was very interesting about that he did during this offseason, he would set meeting times for different hours, and they would always be in the 24th minute of that hour. So it'd be like 11:24 a.m. or 2:24 p.m. or 4:24 p.m. And that's all signaling 24 years since the Miami Dolphins won a playoff game. And that is the message that he's trying to send to these players, that they have not won a playoff game, and there are 40% of this roster returning. So Mike McDaniel doing Mike McDaniel things to motivate his players.
I want to be clarified. I was smiling because I would be the person who shows up at 11:25 and like, hey guys, what? The meeting's still on time, right? And people will be so mad. Okay, time is actually really relevant, I think, to the question of what was the problem at times with the Dolphins offense, because this is an offense that when they operated on time, which is to say unbelievably quickly, they were a buzzsaw. On throws of 2.5 seconds or less, Tua was by any metric one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. It was later in the down, as you see here, when he held onto the ball for more than 2.5 seconds, which is basically anything outside of quick game, numbers started to dip, which you saw against better defenses because they were able to play good coverage or come in with game plans to force him to hold onto the ball. Now, this raises the question, why is this a problem? And unfortunately, it's a complicated one. There's a number of reasons. Yes, some of it certainly is on Tua, who has to play better under pressure. But I would argue a bigger issue is one that has plagued this Dolphins team, this roster, for a few years now, and that's the offensive line. They added some skill players who will help later in the down, but if this offensive line cannot protect Tua when he has to hold on to the ball for longer than 2.5 seconds, I don't see them getting over this hump.
And another way to try and slow down this fast-paced Miami Dolphins offense is to actually slow them down. What I mean by that is rerouting receivers. That's one thing that I saw that other teams were able to do. They were rerouting receivers, having Tua hold the ball just a second longer, then all of a sudden you're going to see a play made. Right here, look at the top of your screen. Not going to be a big-time reroute, but right there, going to see a little bit of reroute, mess up the timing on Tyreek Hill. Tua's looking right. All of a sudden, he has to go back to the other side of the field. They're playing zone. All eyes are on Tua. And then the ball gets overthrown, intercepted. And that's not just that. Some teams play man with a cover with two safeties back. Some teams play cover two. Right here, this looks like a cover two defense. Once again, just reroute. My coach would always say, free access equals free yards. Do not give receivers or tight ends free access. Slow them down, mess up the timing, and all of a sudden you see turnovers and interceptions, tips and overthrows start to follow. So the way you slow down a fast-paced team is by actually getting your hands on them and slowing them down.
Yeah, it makes sense. Also, I would like to comment that Mina Kimes has never been late to a single meeting. She's always punctual. And it is 4:25 at 26 right now. So we're just a couple minutes past that 4:24. All right, let's continue on with Tyreek Hill, because it's pretty interesting stuff when it comes to the contract. He still has 3 years remaining on the 4-year, $120 million extension that he signed after being traded to the Dolphins a couple years ago. However, Hill doesn't have any guaranteed money on that contract after this upcoming season. And he's scheduled to earn $19 $14.8 million this season, which ranks 16th among wide receivers. Hill was asked about the wide receiver market and what's next for him. Take a listen.
I'm very excited to, just be a part of, the old wave, which was $30 million, and Justin Jefferson came and surpassed that, man. So very, proud of those guys. Happy for obviously my teammate Waddle, getting his new deal. For guys like me, that's great. I'm 30 years old. Also looking for a new deal. So very, very excited to see where I fit in to that category.
I feel like that was very measured by Tyreek Hill. He did slip in there that he's also looking for a new deal. So, Jeff, that means, as he mentioned, they've paid Waddle. They're trying to figure out what's going on with Tua. They've got to figure out a deal for Tyreek Hill at some point. How are the Dolphins managing all of this?
Well, let's start with Tyreek Hill because it is interesting. They're going about this in a way that we don't often see other players like Brandon Aiyuk being very clear and a little bit not as optimistic as Tyreek Hill is in his words. Drew Rosenhaus, Hill's agent, has also made very clear that he's spoken to Chris Greer about this situation, but it doesn't feel as if Tyreek Hill is planning any type of holdout. He is going into this, again, with a very optimistic tone, talking about Super Bowl aspirations. So the question becomes, will the Dolphins try to make it right for Tyreek Hill before the start of the season, or will they wait until after the season? Certainly feels like the priority here is Tua Tagovailoa. I can tell you there is still nothing imminent there, although negotiations are still very active. So that, to me, feels like the priority for the Dolphins.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. It's the priority, but I also view their contracts, their football fates as being somewhat intertwined, because when I think about Tua and whether the Dolphins should pay him, and I suspect they will, a lot of that to me is predicated on the offense being similar to what it's been. So much of his success is tied to the presence of those two speedy wide receivers as well as Mike McDaniel's scheme. And that's not to say he's not the perfect quarterback for that, but I can't help but feel like if you change that, you would not see the level of performance. I know it sounds like an obvious point, but I think it's very, very true with him in particular. And this feels like a question, Laura, that really is hanging over so many teams this offseason. Can you pay two wide receivers and a quarterback? We've obviously been talking about it with the Bengals quite a bit, and it's something that I think the Dolphins are going to have to figure out because it is a very fine line. Yeah, and the timing isn't exactly the same, but it's something that the 49ers are working on as well as we go to San Francisco and Brandon Aiyuk, who still doesn't have a new deal, of course. Now, San Francisco is continuing to state they want to keep him. Aiyuk keeps making waves on social media, and I don't know if we should read into this or not, but why not? It's July 8th or whatever it is. Over the weekend, Aiyuk posted a screenshot of a Commanders practice with Jaden Daniels running the offense. Of course, the two did play together at Arizona State back in 2019, so there is a connection. But Jeff, has there been any movement on the talks between Aiyuk and the 49ers?
Generally, when we see things like this, it means there is no movement. And that is what I understand to be the case in this situation. I don't expect anything to really change. Nothing is imminent. Maybe something pops in training camp if a team becomes desperate to make some kind of trade. But for right now, the 49ers have their feet in the ground, and they plan on having Brandon Aiyuk on the field come week 1.
Yeah, Mina, I'm sure Commanders fans love seeing the TikTok, but does Aiyuk to Washington make sense to you?
Yeah, well, I've said a million times, I think the Niners should try to keep him. I suspect they want to keep him. But from the Commanders' perspective, on one hand, Laura, I mentioned the Bengals. You think about what having a 1A, 1B receiver duo did for Joe Burrow, and it's hard not to want something similar for Jaden Daniels with Terry McLaurin and Brandon Aiyuk. It would absolutely help his development as a quarterback. On the other hand, if you trade for Brandon Aiyuk, you're going to have to pay Brandon Aiyuk. And Terry McLaurin, I believe, has about a year left on his contract, so he's going to want to get paid like a number one wide receiver before. It is hard to construct a roster that way with not one but two highly paid wide receivers.
Yeah, either way, a lot of teams still and will continue to try to copy what the 49ers do. And can't wait to see what he brings in year 2. C.J. Stroud led the NFL in passing yards per game and touchdown to interception ratio last season, becoming the 4th quarterback over 35 years to lead the NFL in both those categories. Look at the names on the list. He joined Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, and John Elway. Now, none of those quarterbacks did it within their first 7 seasons in the league. Stroud did it as a rookie. Texans wideout Tank Dell sees his quarterback ascending even higher in year 2. Take a listen.
Till we enter the NRG or whoever stadium we're going to play at, man, he bring a special type of swag to when he come into play. So you can see it in him. Yeah, I for sure feel like CJ got the opportunity to be the best quarterback in the league. What I'm seeing him do each and every week, like what the world see, they seeing exactly what we seeing, man. How he just coming out there and as a 21-year-old man, he going against, grown man, and he out there just balling every week. It's like how consistent he is. I feel like CJ got to just keep doing what he's doing to bridge the gap between him and Mahomes, man.
Ooh, sound the alarms, the dangerous Mahomes comp. Okay, but Mina, is that the trajectory for Stroud?
Yeah, I actually loved hearing him say that because it got me thinking about Mahomes' own journey after lighting the league on fire his first year. The next couple of years, as Laura, you remember all too well because we talked about it endlessly on NFL Live, defenses started playing him with that too high shell coverage, and he grew so much as a quarterback, working underneath, being patient, lowering his average depth of target. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar with Stroud, especially with this receiver corps that, of course, now has Stephon Diggs as well. Teams are going to play them that way. Now, I want to note, when Stroud faced too high last year, he was 8th in QBR, neck and neck with Lamar Jackson, so he's already very good at it. But I expect him to face it even more this season, and he's going to have to show the patience that we saw from Patrick Mahomes after his first year as a starter.
But I love his confidence, Mina. I love how he said, I have nothing to prove and no one to impress. And that confidence comes, yes, from him, but also from his coach. I ran into D'Amico Ryans a couple weeks ago at the airport, and we were chatting. And I said, were you surprised at the early success of C.J. Stroud? He said, absolutely not. He said, I'm happy about it, but we expected to win and expected to win earlier. Remember, D'Amico Ryans played for a long time in the NFL. He's won before. He knows what it's like. And so for me, you have a player who was a coach or coach who was a player who believes in your ability, and then he goes and gets guys, you talked about it, gets guys to help, like Stephon Diggs, to help increase that ability. So I couldn't be more excited for C.J. Stroud because of the weapons, him, Diggs, Mixon, et cetera, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. It's going to be fun to watch.
Man, I don't run into anybody in the airport. I need to work on my airport game. A lot of pressure in Dallas this offseason as Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy both on the final year of their deals. And now this, Dak was seen wearing a walking boot last week while on vacation in Cabo San Lucas. Now, usually a cowboy in a boot is considered fashion, but in this case, Jeff, what do we know about the situation?
Well, I can just tell you that everybody is downplaying this. The Cowboys are saying it is a non-story, that this is simply a situation where Dak Prescott said that the last time he went deep sea fishing that he actually had his foot swell on him, which I've never heard of before. And I can get behind the whole thing. I just can't get behind that part of it.
I mean, Jeff, you know a thing or two about deep sea fishing. Jeff, put on your mic, by the way. It's I think it was off you. Put that on.
That's a normal thing, Laura. That's what we do.
I know. We can still sort of hear you. It's just, we got better audio available for the people there. All right, as for the Cowboys defense, it was one of the best in the NFL during Dan Quinn's 3 seasons as their defensive coordinator. But as Mike Zimmer takes over as the Cowboys DC, one area that he'll look to clean up is penalties. The Cowboys defense was called for 57 penalties last season, 3rd most in the NFL, and that continued a trend from the previous 2 years. Safety Malik Hooker thinks this defense will be much better on that front this year.
These past couple of weeks of having this new system and going out there OTAs and doing everything we've been doing, like, you can tell the difference of, I would say, discipline that we're going to be this year. Like, it's like if you watched a lot of our games, like a lot of the big games we lost, I mean, yeah, there were plays made, but a lot of the times we were shooting ourselves in the foot.
Interesting. Cleaning up the penalties and playing more disciplined will be a part of the Zimmer redesign. Mina, how else do you think this unit will change this fall with the new DC?
Well, the biggest problem last year with this defense, which was very good at getting after the quarterback, good in coverage, even after losing Stephon Diggs, who's their number 1 cornerback, to injury, was against the run, struggles against the run. They were 10th in EPA per play against the run, which sounds good, but 30th in success rate. And what that discrepancy means is while they didn't allow that many explosive runs, on a down-to-down basis, teams were able to run the ball on them. So how does Mike Zimmer address that? Some of it, I think, will be with his use of personnel groupings. This was a defense that lived in sub-packages, nickel and dime last year. Some of that had to do with injuries at linebacker. I think we will see more of a base 4-3-4 from Zimmer. He also has to get better play, though, from not just the linebackers. You bring in Eric Kendricks, who's a veteran. You have Marvian Overshone, who had an injury, year lost last season to injury. But their first-round draft pick, Mozzie Smith, defensive tackle, he needs to play better. So it's not just about scheme, but also about development if they want to get better at fitting the run.
But both definitely matter, to your point, Mina. Development matters, but the scheme matters. And specific to that piece of scheme is the signing of Eric Kendricks. A lot of people, Cowboys fans, are saying, man, we didn't sign anybody. What's going on? Eric Kendricks is a great signing. Why? Because he spent his first 7 years with Mike Zimmer in Minnesota. So the defense that you see from Minnesota, the defense you're probably going to see with Dallas, that double A-gap mug, 2 linebackers lined up in the A-gap. You don't know who's going to blitz, who's going to drop into coverage. Eric Kendricks has a deep and keen understanding of that defense. He can help teach it to the other guys on that in the locker room and on that side of the ball. And so I think that sign is going to be big. Trevon Diggs being healthy is going to be big. It'll give Deron Bland an opportunity to continue to make plays. So for me, I think this defense with Mike Zimmer is going to be extremely effective.
Yeah, just a reminder, Diggs played just 2 games last season before tearing his ACL in practice in September. Mina, off the top of this segment, we saw just the disappointment from Dallas. They gave up 48 points, that defense did, against the Packers to be ousted from the playoffs. Just more on what needs to change there in your mind as they look to revamp, especially that side of the ball going into next season.
Yeah, Laura, I just rewatched this, trying to remember why. And look, the game got out of hand very quickly. Some of it had to do with Dak Prescott's interceptions. You had a pick 6 earlier on. So that really, I think, affected the game script. All of that is true. But what struck me watching the Cowboys defense against Green Bay was how much they struggled with motion and play action. And those were issues that popped up from time to time during the regular season, too. Now, a lot of that has to do with the aforementioned lack of linebackers. The Green Bay Packers offense, and you saw some similar offenses with heavy personnel groupings that leaned on using tight ends, really exploit that part of the field. But to me, some of it also has to do with that defense under Dan Quinn having very specific rules that Matt LaFleur was able to exploit in the postseason.
And to your point, Mina, part of it is that. Another part is the lack of discipline. You can't beat somebody else if you're beating yourself. And that's what the Cowboys were doing on offense and defense. By penalties, you see guys jump off sides. They were literally beating themselves. And so before you can try and face another opponent, you have to be able to get your own house in order. That's one thing that the Dallas Cowboys need to improve. Heard it from Malik Hooker, and hopefully that'll be an extra motivation for them to be a more disciplined football team and stop beating themselves.
Yeah, Sam, to your point, Malik Hooker saying we were shooting ourselves in our foot.